I support the affirmative action because it helps bring on board those who have not been given a chance in the past.
The ladies should be given enough resources and opportunities to represent themselves and empower themselves so that we can have equal opportunities.
But it should be possible. Why not? Look at Malawi, president of a woman.
Kenya nchi yetu sahi, tunataka watu ile wanaenda kufanyia kazi wananchi, sio mtu naenda kulala kwa bunge ama sio mtu naenda kulala kwa community. Kwa maana sahi tunaenda hii ya counties. Counties is kitu ile very sensitive. Governor and senator na women representative ni kitu lazima aone wananchi, aone vijana, wasichana na wafanyie kazi.
I urge the youth to come up strongly, to believe in themselves, because they have the number. And I also urge the leaders who are youthful leaders to come up also to vie for these positions.
They say the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. We are living in a historic time. Our vote in the forthcoming elections will give birth to a devolved system of government in Kenya. The next elections will also bring into effect the gender and affirmative action provisions, which will increase the representation of women, youth, people with disabilities, and other minority groups in political decision-making. The method of achieving the gender and affirmative action equation has generated intense debate. And so, today, on Countdown to Counties, we take a closer look at the constitutional provisions on gender. And we ask the question, what is the ideal gender equation? Will affirmative action meet its purpose? Will the measures provided prevent capture by elite groups? And of course, will the gender and affirmative action aspirants meet the Chapter 6 threshold? Affirmative action in Kenya dates back to the mid-80s, with the United Nations Women's Conference held in Nairobi in 1985. The concept of affirmative action is rooted in the early 1900s.
We can trace the concept of affirmative action from the women's movement of the 1900s, especially in Britain, which peaked around 1914, 1915, where women were demanding the right to vote. I think they were called the suffragettes. And from then, in the maybe 1930s, going to 1950s, 60s, there was maybe picking up in the 1970s, there was this idea of the feminist movement. They developed this concept of gender, i.e. that both men and women have specified roles in society. Society assigns roles to the sexes, and this was now defined as gender, which is now the current thinking, that both men and women have to be interfaced, and their roles have to be interfaced so that you get a complete society. So this is now what we have as the gender movement.
The Constitution of Kenya provides for gender equity and affirmative action in political representation. Article 81 states that no more than 2/3 of the members of elective public bodies shall be of the same gender. The Constitution then provides for special seats set aside for women in marginalised groups. The Constitution creates an opportunity for women, disabled, and other marginalised groups to get into positions of political decision-making. What is the significance of affirmative action? And what does it promise in terms of improved governance?
I think with affirmative action, with clearer ways of ensuring that persons with disabilities, persons from minority communities, women, youth actively participate, we will ensure that our political landscape improves, because we will have multiple voices, bringing multiple experiences, bringing multiple ideas when it comes to legislative development. If you look at, for instance, issues that are dear to persons with disabilities, for an able-bodied person, they might not be able to understand the challenges that a person with disabilities faces on a daily basis. They may not be able to understand some of the solutions that are provided that a person with disabilities, because of being and living in that situation, will be able to provide or bring to the table. And also we need to have voices from multiple groups, because we are a multiple colored, bodied, able-bodied, different sexed country.
The representation of women in parliament in Kenya has been poor, but all this is set to change when the 2/3 formula comes into effect. Since independence to the present time, out of 120 nominated MPs, only 24 have been women. Over the past 50 years, the representation of marginalized groups in parliament has also been poor. But all this is set to change. Countries such as Rwanda and South Africa have been far ahead of Kenya in terms of the number of women representatives in parliament.
There are a number of countries, both in Africa and outside Africa, that have been able to ensure that their parliaments represent women almost up to 50-50. Rwanda, our neighboring East African country, has been able to attain this. Mostly also countries from the Scandinavian region outside Africa have been able to attain this. And therefore there is really no need for Kenyans really to fail with regards to this principle.
As we plan to embrace the principle of gender equity and affirmative action, what exactly singles out one disadvantaged group from the other?
It is social exclusion or social marginalization. Because of the smallness of number, historically they have been forgotten, because people go and vote for themselves and it's a question of numbers, you know? So they get excluded from political life. And so they get like oppressed, even in terms of looking for jobs, because they are not part of the exercise of power. The other factor is about societal attitudes. For example, in the case of persons with disabilities, you know, society has assigned them a certain value. They have been devalued. And when you devalue a group or a community, then you start stigmatizing, you start justifying why certain things should not be done for them. So when that happens over generations, then even the stigmatized, even the devalued, get to accept that that is their lot in life.
The 2/3 provision has turned into a political nightmare, with political pundits unable to decide on how to effect it. Constitutional experts are divided, with some threatening that failure to resolve the issue before the forthcoming elections will result in a constitutional crisis.
Article 81B of the Constitution has a very clear provision that in all elective public bodies, not more than 2/3 of the members of such bodies shall be of one gender. Now, the elective public bodies that we are talking about are essentially three: the County Assembly, the National Assembly, and the Senate.
Now, what this means at the national level is at both the legislature, meaning the parliament, looking at the executive, meaning government, looking at the judiciary, all commissions, independent offices have to ensure that they do not have majority men, for instance, completely men, or only women in those positions. What is unfortunate is that there is strong resistance to actually allowing women to participate in these positions. So it's because of our cultural biases, it's because of our patriarchal thinking, the way we've been socialized by society to believe that women cannot participate properly, whether it's in elections, whether it's in appointive positions, that there is so much resistance. And unfortunately, this resistance has borne its head in terms of people saying that the 2/3 principle is progressive. The 2/3 principle is not progressive. In the Constitution, wherever a provision is envisioned to be progressive, the Constitution clearly states as much.
I think, especially in the field of the elective positions, people have raised this issue. If everybody else gets these positions by virtue of elections, how is it that a huge group will be given this more or less in a fairly undemocratic, they claim, way? Because the only way you will get the 30%, hopefully, is through nomination.
Affirmative action normally is put in place to level the playing field, to ensure that a historical injustice is actually dealt with, and it's only put in for a short period of time for that imbalance to be corrected. What we see with the two-thirds principle is that it will be forever enshrined in our Constitution, so that if we ever get to a situation whereby more women are elected than men, that principle will come into force to ensure that we don't have a parliament or we don't have a county assembly of only women.
So how exactly will the two-thirds rule be affected? And what are the risks?
What is expected is that political parties will field a list of, in alternative succession, both men and women. And the principles that a political party needs to look at is in terms of addressing the historical injustices, in terms of ensuring that they have youth on their list, they have persons with disability on the list, they have both men and women. Now, that is how nominations will be made with regards to being able to address issues of the party lists. When it comes to actual elections and us being able to actualize the two-thirds principle, it's important for political parties to field both men and women in various positions, ensuring that they have two-thirds of either gender within their membership, two-thirds of either gender within the key positions of the political party, so that then we can truly have an election whereby Kenyans have a choice of electing either a man or a woman, but at the same time we have elective bodies that are reflective of society, whereby both men and women are active.
Some people are seeing this as a weakness, because if the value of you being a leader is by virtue of people having cast votes for you, now you are getting this position simply because you're a woman, so that you have to be put on a list. Some people have a problem with this. Depending on how we interpret the Constitution, people can go to court and declare that that assembly is not properly constituted and therefore it must be dissolved. So we can create a constitutional crisis if we insist on immediate fulfillment of the two-thirds rule.
Even though affirmative action is a positive step to increase representation of historically marginalized groups, because these steps involve preferential selection, it has generated intense controversy. Does affirmative action undermine democratic representation? There are fears that the women's lobby may dominate and overshadow other marginalized groups, such as youth, disabled, and minorities. Are these fears justified?
For now, affirmative action, we equate it with women, but it's not. It's like when we talk about gender, people equate gender with women, but gender is not women. Gender is really the roles and responsibilities of males and females, and that is what we should concentrate on. And we are saying in the new dispensation, we want to start moving towards ensuring that equity. Hopefully we start with these two-thirds, not more than two-thirds of any gender, but eventually we'll end up with having equity of 50-50. Even more, and I think the East African Legislative Assembly was a good thing for Kenya. We almost had more women going. So we beat the two-thirds almost to a little bit higher, and we almost, if the other woman was not got it, we would have had more women in the East African Legislative Assembly.
When we will be evaluating our affirmative action, we have to be sensitive to the differential speeds of acquiring or attaining equality. The numerical strength of women, they form 52% or 51% of our society. So numerically, they are already dominant. they also have certain factors going for them. For example, they have had a longer presence in the advocacy, in the lobby arena, more than the other marginalized groups. So they are less, in a way you can say, women are now less marginalized than the other marginalized groups.
The suspicion or the fear that women will overshadow marginalized groups or minority groups is just a manifestation of patriarchy. It's just a manifestation of this stereotyping that we have had, that if you give one particular group something, then you're automatically disadvantaging another group. But that is just a perception. So that is an unfounded bias or an unfounded fear that people need to just dispel from their minds and understand that all groups really work or should be working for the betterment of our country.
The Constitution introduces a large number of nominated member seats. In the past, the performance of nominated members has been varied, with some star performers leaving a distinct mark, while others hardly spoke a word in Parliament and seemed there just to enjoy the ride. One aspect that will determine the performance of affirmative action members is the culture of political parties and their leadership. The Constitution provides standards for political parties, and these are to be enforced by the Registrar of Political Parties and the Independent Electoral Boundaries Commission, or the IEBC. Will they manage to tame Kenya's rogue political parties? The Constitution provides standards for political parties. They must have a national character. They must uphold democratic principles through regular and free elections. They must respect the right of all persons to participate in the political process, including minorities, marginalized groups, women, and youth. They must respect and promote human rights and fundamental freedoms, and gender equality and equity.
That will be a challenge. It depends on whether our parties are willing to obey the electoral laws. That is the Political Parties Act, the Elections Act, and related laws. Now, if parties can democratize and if parties can allow for participation, transparent participation by its members, then we could achieve the goal.
It's important for there to be accountability. There are various ways that this can be done. You can get the special group or special person who is representing a special group to sign a charter that spells out what the obligations are, what they're expected to do, what their values are, what they will do when they're in office, to hold them accountable to that charter. It's also another accountability measure is through the political party, because each political party has a manifesto, has an ideology. So it's also a mechanism to hold those persons accountable, and also ensuring that as these persons are being prepared for this office, they understand the importance of public participation, they understand the importance of interaction with the public, so that even once they're in office, they continue participating and interacting with the public to get the feedback. So it's important for us to engage our political parties. It's important for us to ask these questions. Where is your policy with regards to nominations? If I am not happy with this particular nomination, what is my recourse? What kind of dispute resolution mechanism is there in place within the party for me to be able to address my issues?
Despite the many gains, we are all called upon to be vigilant in the implementation of the Constitution, as the forces of impunity and the old order are determined to maintain the status quo. We have witnessed the executive ignoring the court order on the 47 county commissioners. Similar attempts to overturn the ruling on the Supreme Court composition have failed. We are forced to ask, can we trust the old order to implement the new order?
In 2011, the establishment of the Supreme Court began, and this was led by the Judicial Service Commission. Now, the Judicial Service Commission actually advertised for the positions within the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is made up of 7 judges, including the Chief Justice and the Deputy Chief Justice. Unfortunately, what happened in that scenario is that out of a position of 7, we had 5 men being proposed and only 2 women. And when you look at this vis-a-vis the 2/3 threshold, it is clear that the 2/3 threshold was not met. So it was a strong feeling of institutions such as FIDA and other women rights organizations that Article 27(8) of the Constitution had been violated, because the Judicial Service Commission had actually gone over the 2/3 threshold with regards to representation of gender. We took the matter to court. Unfortunately, the court did not agree with us, but what they failed to address was whether really the 2/3 threshold was met.
In that case of FIDA and questioning the Supreme Court, I think the court did not really guide the country well. And therefore, it is important that instead of criticizing the court, we go and appeal that decision to a higher court, because that was given by a high court. We still have a we still have a court of appeal, and on top of that, we have a Supreme Court. I think the Court of Appeal could even reverse that decision that was made by the High Court. I think the most recent ruling by Lady Justice Mumbi Ngugi on constitutionality of the appointments of county commissioners also is a very good pointer that we are headed in the right direction. That the President did not consult. The Constitution is very clear. Until the first general elections are held, all appointments by the President shall be in consultation with the Prime Minister. That is 100% and it's in the Constitution. The second thing is that in those appointed offices, we should pay due regard that not more than 2/3 of those appointed are of the same gender. There again, the county commissioners so appointed did not meet that, and that's why that decision by the executive was thrown out through that court case.
How then can special interest members ensure they make the most of the opportunities availed under the new constitution?
We should be prepared to vote for other people, but we should also be prepared to be voted for in positions of leadership. And so we must come out either as candidates or as voters.
I think it's important for the various special groups which have been given special seats in the county assembly and in the National Assembly to be able to understand which seats are available to them, understand that it's not only the special seats that are available to them, it's important also for them to understand what their vision is for their country, understand what their vision is for the special group that they will be representing or the special group that they come from, and understand what is expected of them. For marginalized communities, I think there's a lot of organizing going on to ensure that actually persons do come out and put themselves out for both election and for nominations. And how we ensure that we have good leaders is for us to encourage the good leaders amongst us to take up some of these positions. It's for us to be able to spot a bad leader 10 miles away and say, I'm not going to sell my vote. I'm not going to be bribed by you. I am not going to go for your campaign rally because I know you're an instigator of violence.
As we head to the ballot for a very different type of election, which will see us usher in a devolved system of government and move a step forward in implementing the Constitution, the importance for peaceful elections cannot be overstated.
I think what Kenyans need to realize is that when it comes to violence during elections, before, after, the violence is perpetrated by us, be it in our words, be it in what we put in social media, be it by what we do even to our neighbors. So the perpetrators of violence are amongst us, they are us. So Kenyans have to realize, for us to have peace, we must be peaceful, not just by our actions, but also by what we put on social media, what we say through a text message to a friend about any particular group or tribe or community. So it's upon each and every one of us to make sure that where we see also triggers of violence, we report the matters to the police, who have an extensive network in terms of being able to undertake early warning. Kenyans also have to realize that they have a civic duty to vote. They vote in the leaders that they vote in. Therefore, if you sit back and not vote, you cannot then complain about the leader you have.
As with any leadership position, whether elective or appointive, integrity is a major factor. And of course, Chapter 6 still applies to the gender and special seats representatives.
One of the key gains that we also have in this constitution is around issues of leadership and integrity.
The benchmarks we have set in Chapter 6 of the Constitution, if we adhere to them strictly, it means we will be able to remove any leader who may have issues in their personal integrity in the past or in the future. And we would be able, for example, to get leaders who we can trust with the national resources, stewardship of the national resources, and stewardship of our lives.
The Constitution is the supreme law of this country, and therefore the leadership and integrity legislation has to actually meet the standards within the Constitution. And these standards run for both men and women, persons with disability, youth. It runs for everyone who is a leader in our country.
What type of a voter are you? Remember to vote with your head and to choose a leader who meets the standards of Chapter 6 and who will bring development to your county. Good counties need good leaders. Support Chapter 6.
We are on the way now, because at least we've got a framework called a constitution which can guide us, but we've got to be very, very vigilant that nobody comes along and hijacks it. And we've seen the attempts to do that in the very recent past. Okay? So we've got to be very vigilant, and we've got to speak up and say, no, this is our country. Mimi ni Mkenya daima. I'm a Kenyan forever, and I do not want anyone to say I'm a child. I am a Kenyan, I own this country. And every Kenyan owns this country. It doesn't belong to a few. I think this is where we've got to say we do not want doomsday. What happened in 2007, 2008 was a disaster like nobody ever imagined. And we never want to go back there. That's why we are saying we want peace, and we Kenyans are going to be vigilant.
This program is brought to you by TISA with the support of our funding partners. However, views expressed are those of the individuals featured and do not necessarily represent views of our partners.